Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure being over here and, of course, moderating this session. And a big thank you to the ETHR World for really organizing this. And a double thank you for really organizing a discussion on this topic, which is really, really close to me and very dear to me. So I'm very happy to be over here, doing a much simpler job of asking the questions. But we'll try and make sure that our panelists sort of bring the best of what we want to understand about sustainability and how we go about it. So basically, I think just to set the context, I think all of us are just coming out of one of the biggest crises that we have seen, in many years called COVID, right? 2.5 years back, when really the COVID hit us, this was completely caught unaware. We all were caught completely unaware. We didn't know what to do in this situation. This was of a health crisis at a different level, which actually led to social crisis, which actually led to financial crisis, and so on. But I think somehow we managed to sort of salvage the situation. We've been able to come out of this. Having said so, I think there's another crisis which is really coming very close to us. And this is something that we are seeing for over last at least 3 or 4 decades, that it is coming as close as we can see, and which is the crisis of really the threat to our environment, the threat to our mother nature, right? The world that we live in, the world that we live in, how we are slowly and gradually exploiting this whole place and perhaps creating a threat for many generations who are going to come and live in this world and perhaps will not be able to enjoy the beauty, etc., that we have enjoyed so far. So today, it's a very serious topic. It has always been, but I think this has to be now taken at a very, very rampant space because the house is really on fire, right? So all of us individually, at the corporate level, collectively, in whichever possible way, I think we all have to come together to really talk about this topic and see how we can build a very compelling strategy, around this, which can help us take a U-turn and probably help us salvage the situation that we are slowly and gradually, and rather actually very fast, going into this whole thing. I think what I can talk about a little bit more is that the organization that I come from, which is L'Oreal, I think we are in the space of providing beauty to the whole world. But at the core of our entire organization is also sustainability. And it spells out in our purpose, where we also say that create the beauty that moves the world sustainably. And exactly 10 years ago, when we actually came together as an organization, we actually created our sustainability commitment to the environment, to the world at large, where we created our 3 strong pillars around sustainability. One was really about how do we protect the planet, the entire biodiversity which is around us, which could be climate, we can talk about the water, all of that which is around us, the resources, energy, and so on. The second one really was how do we empower our business ecosystem, which could also mean that suppliers, customers, how do we work with them and also make them very sustainable. And third was really about contributing to the social and environmental needs. So that's something that we've been able to put our plans together, and we are very happy about the progress that we are making. And I can go on and on, but that's not really my space because I'm not really an expert on this. This is something that I just shared as an anecdote in terms of how L'Oreal is doing. But today, I think the space is really for our panelists today because what we are going to do is to ask them questions. Each one of them come from a very strong background where they have worked on building business strategies, also helping the business, build a sustainable model through ESG goals and so on. So this is where we are going to be exploring the whole conversation with, all 3 of them. So thank you so much for joining the panel discussion. Basically, I'll open the question and probably, each one of you can sort of jump in to answer the question, and let's try and make it as sharp, as crisp as possible, because then we can take many questions. And if we have time, then we can also invite some questions from the audience. I don't promise, but let's see how the time goes from here. So digging quickly on to the first question that I have. First, I would like to understand from each one of you, What is your a quick perspective around what's happening around the sustainability space? And then maybe driving on from there, what do you think the organization can do to structurally adopt the sustainability program for the organizations who are new to this, and also the organizations who perhaps already have something in place? How can they fasten the entire process of working on their goals? So maybe we can start with Jay.
Sure. Thanks for having me here, and good evening, everyone. So, if you look at sustainability as a concept and look at the three, pillars, which is environment, social, governance, right? The environment part gets a lot more attention and a lot of discussion. Unfortunately, we don't see so much of discussions happening on the social part as well as the governance part, right? So, governance is about disclosures, having equality at the boardrooms. Social is all about bringing in an inclusive workforce, etc. But coming back to the environment point, which is which constitutes a very large chunk of the entire sustainability story. So there was this interesting book written by Michael Crichton, long back. I believe the name of the book was State of Fear or something. So there is this interesting book about this island called Vanuatu. That's how the book starts, where this group of people from this island, it's an island independent country. They go to the representation that this island is sinking every year by a few centimeters, right? So they feel that the projection was that in the next 30 years, they were going to completely go down, right? And then the author, Michael Crichton, as you know, builds upon the entire story about how the entire climate story was hoaxed up by all the corporations, right? So basically, if you look at all the numbers, the first 50 to 60 pages of the book, it's a nice thriller book, is all about sharing numbers right from the 1920 onwards, when all this data about warming and ice cap melting, etc., was captured. He gives a detailed time series picture about how potentially, the entire climate change is a hoax, right? But slowly he builds up this entire story and brings in data points about how a lot of lobbies out there are suppressing a lot of these news articles, right? But coming back to the original discussion, as we progress, I'll share some perspectives in terms of how potentially technology innovations can play a role in each one of these pillars, and then we'll discuss more.
Rajiv, you want to come in?
Sure. Do you mind repeating the question once?
The question really was, we would really like to understand your perspective around this whole topic on sustainability. And more importantly, what would you advise or suggest for organizations to adopt a model around sustainability commitment?
No, thank you. I was listening to Jay's answer, and I went somewhere else in my mind. That's why I wanted you to repeat that. But thank you. So, very good evening, everyone. I think this is really good of Economic Times to kind of set up this forum, and I think a majority of the people here are from the HR background, and I think in a lot of ways ESG is an opportunity for HR leaders to take on a role. It's once in a lifetime opportunity that's come again, where we can go beyond what HR traditionally has done or has been doing. Because almost every aspect of ESG, all the three, the environment piece, the social piece, and the governance piece, has large amounts of overlap with the work that we do, both at the strategic level, in terms of whether it's the board composition or the management composition or the diversity within the workforce. So that's around the governance piece. Around the social piece, in terms of the kind of remuneration policies we have, the inclusivity that we create or don't create through our policies, and of course the environmental piece, which kind of lends itself very easily to understanding around the climate change and what a company can do. In all the three areas, my view is the CHRO has a great opportunity to take a leadership role and influence both at the board level and at the leadership team level. So at S&P, one of course is I could talk about, what we do internally as a company. But I think more importantly, what I would like to highlight is right now ESG, so S&P, just in a 30-second thing, is a ratings company basically. You have of course heard of S&P 500 and so on. So that's what we do. And right now, one of the biggest growth areas is around ESG ratings. And every company out there globally is trying to ensure that their ratings are, well thought out and, form part of a structure where investors can decide how, whether they wish to invest in this company or not for the long term. The entire issue of sustainability. So for CHROs to get involved at this point has a direct impact in terms of what the investors think, what the stock price will be, and how the company is going to be seen today and in future. So it's a major opportunity, and I think this is really timely and a great forum to, to kind of raise the profile of what HR leaders can do on ESG. So that's my view. Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you. Sanjay, you want to add it?
Thanks. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So I am literally the last or the first person from the boardroom sandwiched between all the HR guys. So let me take that. And how I see it is, if this is the key issue is, if this is so logical that good for environment is ultimately good for people, good for planet, and good for business, then why is it really so hard? And I think this fundamental level of contradiction comes from how basically the organizations or the businesses are wired. So even besides the high profile ESG issue now, I think we have been talking about the people, planet and profits for a long time, the 3P. But at the same time, moment you have a business conversation with the analyst, with the stakeholder, any CEO or any CXO is going to talk about what are the economic benefits, what are the environment benefits, and what are the social benefits. And if you see, the first 3P and these three aspects are just in reverse order. So that is where it is an issue of the balance has to be brought. So the right impact is, we don't have to see sustainable development and economic growth as a either or solution. The proactive organizations of today and who will be the winners for tomorrow, they really have to see that it is actually not even two sides of the coin, it is the same approach, and that is where it is really going to be value adding for all the stakeholders. So to do a responsible business or to do a sustainable business is actually going to be a great business opportunity. And moment we have that fundamental business DNA reset is how you can be successful. And I saw that for many years. Let me give you a quick example of two out of the three organizations. And I'm not giving the example for the third because Rajiv is representing that. So I brought, many years back, I brought S&P into India. So I was, for 7 years, I was in Mahindra's, and where I was leading the Mahindra World City business, and where our fundamental mission was, how do you transform urban landscape by creating sustainable communities? So there is going to be a tremendous urbanization, people will need jobs, people will need a good place to stay, people need, ultimately they are coming for ease and a good quality of living. And unless you take an integrated approach, you will not be able to be successful at an aggregate level. So we did a lot of work, and I'm happy to elaborate a bit more, but like just one strand, as part of one of the world cities, it actually within 4 years it became Asia's first and world's largest project to reach C40 climate positive development program stage 2. And at the same time also have a huge economic impact. So it is not a either or. And similarly for 12 years, I was working with various different businesses for Tata Group. And as you know, they are truly the landmark with their leadership in trust, and that fundamentally anything which they do, both in the business structure with 66% of the holdings with the trust, and how they think, it is always a greater benefit. So I think it basically requires in a boardroom mindset reset, and I think that is exactly where it is the CHROs and the other supporting organizations come in to enable, to learn and move on to the path. And maybe what we have to do, if I can just take one strand from Mr. Sriram said in the morning, that if effectively the role of CHROs in this to be a true enabler is what does really the active learning or anytime learning will mean. It really means that the whole organization themselves needs to have a culture of learn, unlearn and relearn. And if you are continuously doing that, then you are not just reset, you are not just doing a contradiction, but it is like almost like in an Indian philosophy, like a shank, you will move, even when you will come back at a higher level to restart your journey.
Fantastic. So, in all the conversation that all of you had spoken about, one thing that I sort of highlighted, or at least it came out as a highlight, that CHRO has to play a role of an enabler. And you also said the same thing, Rajiv. Many of us in this room are CHROs. So my question really too is that if you are interacting with the CHROs, and if you were to tell us what will be the role of innovation in building the whole sustainability program, or what kind of technology that can play a role if all of us as a CHRO need to put the sustainability program within our own organization, what would those advices or suggestions be to all of us?
So let me share some tangible examples in terms of how some of those leading enterprises are doing some of those things. We all know that the supply chain / value chains are extremely complex, right? So they are spread across the world. If you're a manufacturing entity, you'll have your design happening in one part of the world. You have the manufacturing happening. You have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers across the board. You have, that is just the upstream. Then you have the product coming into the end customer. The customer is using the product in a certain fashion. They got to dispose the product, and then the downstream kicks in, wherein the entire recycling happens. So it's an extremely complex, supply chain / value chain, which means that there is a tremendous amount of information asymmetry in terms of if an entity is a key entity in this entire value chain, needs to play an active role. They need to leverage technology across the board to capture data and information about each step in the value chain, where your partners are compliant with some of those environmental regulations. Is your product complying with the packaging regulations required? When the product is disposed, how are the batteries being recycled, or how the product is being recycled? Throughout this entire life cycle, technology can play a critical role. I'll give you a few examples. We have in the previous role I had, we had built softwares which will essentially monitor all public data about all your suppliers. If you have a large company, let's say for example, a multi-billion-dollar company, you will have a few hundred or a few thousand suppliers, and they are spread across the world. Are they acting responsibly towards the environment? Are they having solid practices in terms of inclusivity or at the board level, etc.? Many of this information is not available in the public domain because they're not listed companies, they are private small entities, for example. So what we did was we built softwares which will scan news articles and social media posts about all these companies. Right? For example, if there is a protest happening in a bottled water plant in somewhere in interior India, and that news is published by a local newspaper, we were able to capture that information, bring in intelligence and analytics to the to the decision maker level to say there is, something to be worried about. That is just one example. And then there are examples which are happening in the US wherein many of these products are coming QR code marked, wherein you can scan the QR code and actually find out if the product is made in a sustainable fashion. You can actually get a score in terms of how much are they contributing either towards, sustainability, enhancing sustainability, or are there any negative, problems with respect to these products. Similarly, you can have data coming in from across the value chain. You can have sensors embedded across the board, get information about the emissions and various other parameters coming in. A very, very interesting software which I recently came across was, you must have all heard about this concept of greenwashing, right? So basically, ESG is a cool word, like you said. It's going to impact your share price. It's important that you put your best foot forward when you're reporting these numbers, which means that you essentially play around with some of these ESG numbers in your balance sheet. So there is this interesting open source software out there which will essentially do an automatic analysis of your past few years statements, right? And it'll identify for you if the company is engaging in greenwashing, etc. So a lot of interesting things happening, and innovation and technology can be a key enabler to identify those lacuna where information asymmetry lies, and take preventive actions and take important decisions how to fix each one of these elements in the ESG life cycle.
Now, Sanjay, fair. Sanjay, you talked about this whole setting up the world cities, and the sustainability was a very important core of when you were building around the whole thing. So give us some anecdotes of how did you sort of brought those innovation into limelight and sort of knitted into the overall strategy that you were working on.
Yeah, thanks, Roshni. So if you really talk of, everyone talks about at the crux of sustainability, what is it? Essentially, how responsible or how efficient can you be in the various resource management, and how can that add value? So whether you talk about then the typical aspects which come is about food, transport, waste management, water management, and energy, right? And I'll just pick up a couple of examples how it can be done. So if within a city, if you ensure that the infrastructure is designed and structured, well planned before the city starts populating, and maybe like a Chandigarh and others, it automatically ensures that the transport and therefore the amount of energy consumption you are doing can actually come in. You do a good, excellent urban design, you actually can align your roads and pathways where there is a lot of natural light which is flowing in. And these are concepts which are, we did all of this, but these are not concepts or innovations we are developing now. This existed right since the time of Indus Valley civilization and even a Pompeii, where you go, the whole sanitation is actually built around a natural incline. So it's there, we have to adapt to the circumstances. And similarly, for example, the water management. Why things become always difficult is first we start spending, and then it's almost trying to fix a flying plane, because then it's, oh, there's too much usage and we need to rebuild. So what we did was right from day one, the complete water management was planned in such a way that there was a potable water and a non-potable water was already fixed, pre-fixed at each and every area, and you can define what percentage you want. And even the non-potable, all the water was actually coming back. And one of the aspects why we won that C40 Climate Positive Development Program was at its peak, 66% of the total water requirement was being met through recyclable water, which instead of fresh water. And ultimately, why is it all of it is happening is at some points every organization may not be able to pick all the or influence all the 17 SDG goals. But what is important is whatever are your priorities, your investors, your stakeholders, and your business priorities, you must ensure you are doing a tangible work in there. And if you do it, why is it, as we talked of, the share price or any other positive impact you're seeing, that is the end result which is coming in. But it's also becoming good for the business, because many of our clients, they in turn, if they are setting up a very large setup, their stakeholders are going to ask what is the impact on the environment. And if they come in into a environmentally well planned and a long term good quality of city, and people will prefer that. When people choose their housing or choose their social area, they would want to be something which is in a good place. And if you do all of that, if I raise it to a higher level, then in a way you can also ensure that the tremendous pressure in infrastructure on roads and highways which you see at a national or at a city level, that can get reduced. So, two quick things about technology which you asked. One is, at all times we were very clear that a smart city is something which is any aspect which adds value to its stakeholder, whether an enterprise client or a visitor or an enterprise or someone who was staying. We were very clear the smart city is not going to mean you have tons of real-time monitor, because what you do with it really makes. So something, similarly any business, all businesses have to be smart if they are efficient and you have a metrics for that. And to give you an example at a national level of use of technology, India is among the first country which has 100% automated real-time dashboard created by Niti Aayog, where you want to go right now, you can see where we are on the SDG 2030 goal. And that ensures that if that's a two-way flow which builds in. So we see it, we know where we are, and when you are contributing, especially in an organization or a function or a business or a region, you can actually clearly start seeing that whole thing is connected, and that is the key role of technology. So innovation is about how you are thinking in an integrated manner, and technology will be an enabler for that.
Very nice. Rajiv, you want to add?
Sure. I'm actually going to try to take a different tack, because I'm thinking if I'm sitting on the other side, what am I looking for? So here are some takeaways that I would like as an HR leader. So, first is, as HR leaders, when what can you do, or what can all of us do? One is, starting point is education. So education is, for the employees, for the management, and for the board in what is ESG all about, and why do it, what are the implications, what happens if we as an organization don't get in the forefront of ESG. So I think that's one place that HR leaders can take ownership and move ahead. And for that you can use, there's a ton of information out there, and there is a lot of data that's available that you can use for your education. So that's one. Second is, look at everything that happens in the organization in terms of people and processes and policies, and examine them not in terms of touching them up for an ESG point of view, but kind of rethinking them from bottoms up using that ESG framework, which means that when we are designing policies, as an example, don't think of HR kind of sitting down and drafting a policy and getting the management team to review it and so on. Instead, what kind of stakeholders do we need to bring into the company to design a policy? So if you are doing it bottoms up, what about the community outside? If you are doing a recruiting policy, what do the vendors think? What do your recruiting vendors think? What do candidates feel about your recruiting policy? How does society generally see your recruiting approach? So that's one microcosm of an example of saying, if you had to think of it from an ESG point of view, you would need to redesign almost every policy and process in the company to become more inclusive and ensure that you're taking the entire social and governance piece into account. And the third piece which HR leaders can walk away with is get data. Without measuring what's happening in the company on ESG aspects, you would not know where we are and what progress we are wanting to make. So those are three aspects. Education, doing a bottoms up in terms of policies and process from a ESG point of view, and third is gathering data and measuring everything that you do. So I would say those are three things.
Very right. And I think being a CHRO myself, I was just reflecting what all of you were saying. Again, really to the reality what we are also doing at L'Oreal. For example, Green Step is one of our training program that we do it. And that's not restricted only to the employees. We actually cover our sourcing partners, suppliers, because there is a huge amount of awareness, education, which is really needed at every level across the strata of the society that we deal with. Secondly, you talked about the policy, which I thought was really very important. It could be anything small that you can start in terms of re-engineering your policies, which can actually respect the entire, carbon footprint, or the entire ecosystem that you are working on. For example, we have a very simple policy called green travel. So when you are traveling from a location, and if you can come together by one or two colleagues coming together, you don't have to hire different cars or use your different cars, but just use one car and three of you can come together and go together. We actually reward, by giving them some points, around that. And the third is, of course, there are very strong data, and I think all of you talked about looking at data and how to measure about it. We look at the data, and that's also linked to our performance bonuses. So a good 25% of our performance bonus actually will go away at the end of the year if those 4 or 5 factors that we put in our dashboard are not really met towards the end of the year. So I could really resonate the points that you are raising. And that actually leads to my next question to three of you, because you all talked about the data, the goals, all of it. At an organization level, what are the critical aspects one should look at when they're really designing the matrix or the indicators around measuring some of the ESG goals? And anyone can start. I don't want to do a very monotonous.
Okay, let me start in the middle then.
Yes.
Well, you're right. I mean, what data to measure? I mean, of course, we want to collect a ton of data, but how do you figure out what is going to be in your scorecard or your dashboard and so on? And, ESG is obviously evolving, and, things are kind of getting in place, but there are some good opportunities to look at. So EU, for instance, the European Union has come up with a list of measures that companies can use to understand how well they are doing a self-scoring in terms of their ESG levels and how far have they progressed. And that covers a ton of information in terms of their practices with customers, with vendors, stakeholders, employees, and so on. So it's very comprehensive, and it is increasingly, European Union tends to be at the forefront on a lot of these measures. And just like GDPR on the privacy piece, they've taken the lead on establishing a set of measures, which a lot of the global institutions are using to create a measurement dashboard within. So I would look at something like that to start getting the organization to look at how well are we doing today and what are our opportunities to further progress. So that could be one of them.
Very nice, very nice. Jay, you have
So in addition to the data part, one of the areas where enterprises can look at is bring in a behavioral change, like Rajiv mentioned, in terms of from a bottom-up perspective, and bring in that change across various levels, which is not easy. It's easy to sit here and say that because you need to bring in several micro interventions at various decision points to make it possible. For example, you can use successful concepts from the the nudge, right? Many of you must have read the book of Nudge. So you can essentially bring in elements like, for example, if somebody is traveling you can essentially give how much is the carbon emission for this particular business travel. Can you replace that with a Zoom call, for example, or a Slack call for that matter? Or any of those micro interventions across the board where, slowly it is not easy to, educate a fresher just out of college. If you throw complicated concept, they'll completely shut off. So these micro interventions, gaming the system, gamifying the entire experience can bring in a lot of change, and this is sustainable change which we as enterprises can look at.
Nice. Sanjay, anything?
Sure. So maybe let me try to add a different perspective. So I think herein again the change which is required is we have to move away from or the change required to be successful in future is move away from a compliance mindset and move towards a proactive approach. So, okay, I'm carbon neutral, okay, great. Or I'm doing something else, yeah, this was required, I met that. But the true leadership will come when you say we will set the benchmark. Why should I just comply on that? So, from that perspective, I would say the success of SDG will be when it is seen in an organization or in a CEO or a boardroom not as a sustainable development goal, but as a strategic development goal. Then I will decide to do good business which is environment friendly, is the right thing for my customers and stakeholders, is delivering social good, but at the same time is generating positive economic value. When you have that mindset, that is when it will be a fundamental shift.
Very nice. All right. I think let me take a pause, and we probably have time for maybe taking just one question. Anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question?
So we'll have to keep it sweet and simple because the paucity of time tells us there's only one question to be taken. So if any one of you could raise your hands, because I would like to thank the panelists also.
Okay, we have someone, and yes, please. Yes, you are. That's good.
So we're giving you the mic, sir. So.
It is set up as a sustainable, eco-friendly way of futuristic living set up by King MBS of Saudi Arabia and being touted as the new in thing to do. I guess most of us get very zany by these newfangled concepts that keep coming up, but do not find it rooted in reality. How do you make ESG and innovation at the core of the organization culture? I know it's a rather loaded question, but how do you make it at the core of it in simpler, practical terms so that people, their everyday life, coming to work, picking up a cup of coffee, talking to colleagues, can be conscious of what little things they can do to actually make an impact which is more sustainable? Thanks.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Pradeep. So I think the key aspects here is whether something is a very micro or a small measure or it is a strategic measure. Ultimately, all of it has to be aligned. And if we are able to drive a culture where we will take an integrated view, so that's why sometimes we say that it is a good thing to do, but right now say EV cost is very high. I would ideally want it, but I will wait for when the cost goes down. But the cost will go down when enough people will adapt. So therefore, we have to really in a positive manner drive that circle of influence, and it is happening. So, for example, in the last 1 decade, India is now among the highest and the lowest cost producer for clean electricity. So that's coming in when each of us in our own way are doing something which is the good, and at the same time, at all times, there is alignment across strategic level, operational level, and execution level. So that integrated approach and a culture of continuous ensuring that we are not losing, maybe just in one line I would say, is for good business and for ensuring responsible business. All of us have to keep our eyes simultaneously on the telescope and the microscope.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And every drop counts, right? So, and we all have to start at an individual level. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have. It was really interesting. Thank you so much, and thank you all for your patient listening.